meeting is now live.
Well, good evening, everybody out there. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting and pay my respect to elders past and present. So welcome to tonight's meeting. It is a particularly important one because we're considering the operational plan and the budget going forward for the next 12 months. I declare the meeting open now. COVID pretty obviously is having an impact. So in line with the public health orders and the stay-at-home requirements, we've had major and significant impacts on how we are to work and function. So until such time as those restrictions are lifted, council meetings will be held remotely, and the public, we hope, can attend by way of the webcast. So tonight's meeting will look a little different to viewers at home. To adhere to our physical distancing requirements, we have our teams operating remotely, and we are in the safety of our own environments. I might add that probably for myself, and I think possibly for the CEO, operating remotely is a first for me. And I may be in contact with staff during the course of the meeting via the chat or text messages. It is a new way of working for all of us, and I hope and thank you that you can have our understanding as to how we might go forward. We may experience some technical issues as we navigate through our this evening's meeting, and if we do, I ask that you are patient with us. Nonetheless, I do need to remind people that being webcast, you need to protect your image and be careful about what you say and what is recorded. So please be mindful of that. What I'm going to do now, as I have started to do, is just talk a bit about what's been going on in council over the last 2 to 3 weeks. So it's a relatively long one because it's a little bit of a summary of what we've been doing over the last 12 months. And I think what the achievements we've done have to be taken into consideration with the fact that the organisation has been under tremendous stress and pressure as it's downsized in substantial means and also has had to cope with the uncertainty of the way forward. But just going through some of the things last week, the CEO, David Farmer, and I, we attended the National General Assembly where we heard from the Leader of the Opposition that they're going to support constitutional recognition of local government. I think that would be a good thing because that means that then local government is recognised under the Constitution, and it means the Commonwealth can, it's one thing, can deal directly with us. At the moment, they tend and do have to deal through the states. Constructive meetings were had with our counterparts from the bordering councils, and understanding what had happened at the Central Coast was a major topic of conversation. Unfortunately, we had some pre-arranged meetings with federal MPs, but this was cancelled due to the latest COVID outbreak. However, the CEO and I spent time with the President of Local Government New South Wales, and we discussed changes that might need to be made to the way local government works in New South Wales. I have continued to meet regularly with local members of Parliament to discuss their key concerns and grant opportunities. I also definitely took the opportunity to visit and familiarise myself with the amenities and meeting the staff at the Entrance and Batteau Bay libraries in the lead up to considering the operational plan tonight. I've also looked at more of the sites that we have had up for assets as part of the asset sales program. So what's coming up? We've got the public inquiry. So submissions to the inquiry have now closed. I understand that 1 or 2 people have been able to get approval to make a late submission, and I'm happy that that's been provided for. I have provided the Commissioner with my own submission for her consideration. It is up to the Commissioner if and when she makes these submissions public. And Council does continue to provide the Commissioner with various documentation. Sort of some of the highlights we've had at the end of the financial year. As I said, some of these results are damn good, given the fact that the stress and strain that the organisation's been under. So in the community and recreational portfolio, Council maintained the services and adapted during COVID through innovation in the library space of click and deliver services, digital story times, webinars, and online author events. online community education events, engaging thousands in the community via the council-owned YouTube channel, maintaining all of the parks and sporting fields to support healthy living during COVID. The following strategies were developed by council over this time: the graffiti management strategy, the skate park strategy, play spaces strategy, draft social inclusion charter, and the draft Central Coast positive ageing strategy. And implementation of the affordable housing strategy has commenced. Beach safety season concluded on the 25th of April 2021 with over 3.25 million visitations across the 15 flagged and patrolled beach locations. Now, council lifeguards attended to over 5,500 first aid incidents and performed more than 1,178 rescues. We also successfully implemented the New South Wales Government Summer Safe Plan for beaches and open space, helping to mitigate the challenges of COVID and keeping the region's residents and visitors safe. In Council's 6 leisure and recreation centres during 2021, we had over 1 million visits. This included 90 school swimming carnivals, 40 sporting events, 114,000 learn to swim classes, and over 4,200 group fitness classes during the 12-month period. In the environment and planning portfolio, Council adopted the Consolidated Central Coast LEP, which had been lagging for some considerable time, and the DCP, the Development Control Plan, is in its final phase of being made by the Department of Planning and Industry and Environment. This will mean Central Coast has a single set of planning controls for over 95% of the region. Council-owned land within the deferred matters area has been included, and cost lands have been provided with the highest level of environmental protection possible under the LEP. Council has also adopted the Central Coast Biodiversity Strategy, which sets a clear direction for the Council in achieving positive outcomes for biodiversity and ensures a consistent approach with current legislation. In the 11 months year to date, from July 2020 until May 2021, Council has dealt with 3,157 development applications worth an estimated construction value of over $1 billion. Council's response to the July-September 2020 coastal erosion event saw Council initiate significant emergency protection works at Wharf and the entrance north under the direction of the Leocom to protect a number of at-threat homes. And this was followed by Council commencing a dredging program at the entrance north in September 2020, where we removed approximately 25,000 cubic metres of sand from the entrance channel to help protect properties at the north entrance and cover the exposed tow protection structure. A number of awards were achieved. Council was highly commended as part of the 2021 NRMA Floodplain Management Australia Awards for the Daveston Empire Bay Climate Change Adaptation Strategy. Council's team leader floodplain management, Barissa Garnham, was awarded the Public Works Leader of the Year Award as part of the New South Wales and ACT Institute of Public Works Engineering Australia's 2020-21 Engineering Excellence Award. In the 2020 Local Government Excellence in the Environment Awards, the Terrigal and Coastal Lagoons Audit and Water Quality Improvement Program won the Environmental Health Management Award. And Council was the overall winner of the Local Government New South Wales 2020 RH Doherty Awards in the category of Reporting to Your Community Council, over 70,000. In the Water and Sewer portfolio, Council has successfully completed the Mardi to Warnervale pipeline, which is important infrastructure that will secure water supply and operational pressure to the Northern Growth Corridor. Commencement of water and sewer work is underway to support growth and development in the Gosford CBD. And Council has inspected and relined over 10 kilometres of sewer main and 1.2 kilometres of water main. Significant progress has been made on the Central Coast Water Security Plan. A series of workshops was held during April 21 that guided the selection of the preferred portfolio of future water supply augmentations. The plan will go to an August Council meeting prior to public exhibition in September 2021. And in the infrastructure services portfolio, Council is delivering 145 projects, which include road and drainage upgrades, traffic facilities, shared paths, bus stops, bridges and wharves and road renewals. The current program is on track for completion by 30 June 2021. Completion of the new Woy Town Centre Wharf, the largest wharf project ever completed for the coast, was completed. Council adopted the Central Coast Waste Resource Management Strategy 2020 to 2030 in September 2020. The strategy will drive the region's push to improve solid waste management and resource recovery for the next decade. Now, the Central Coast community also battled severe weather with a declaration of a natural disaster that lashed our region in March 2021. Council staff were responsible for collection of more than 306 tonnes of wrack, including from the road reserve in front of 180 residential properties around Tuggerah Lakes, and flood debris from over 4 kilometres of foreshore. We repaired more than 3,000 potholes across our road networks. We made 22 land sites within road reserves safe. Repairs were made to the majority of sites at 15 locations where significant road damage was identified, and we completed 4,400 bulk curbside collections across the coast in the 2 weeks post the storm event, and that involved at times composting of 882 tonnes of seagrass and seaweed, which will be processed into soil projects. We established over 120 road closures due to flooding over the road during that period, and we carried out the following repairs and works during 2021 in total: 58, nearly 60,000 potholes repaired, 18,000 square metres of heavy patching of the road pavement completed, 2,100 kilometres of street sweeping undertaken, and 405 kilometres of unsealed roads graded. We also looked at 2,000 drainage pits repaired and 10,000 metres of open channels maintained, with nearly 2,000 metres of footpath replaced. So in the corporate affairs area, the Council has launched a new online customer service centre, the CX portal, with a 50% increase in service requests. Commencement of GPS tracking in 620 council vehicles, which will help improve productivity. Awards include here peer recognition of Central Coast Council's approach to community engagement and providing opportunities for public participation in matters that are important to the community, with awarding of highly commended Organisation of the Year by the International Association of Public Participation, IAP2. We also had the adoption of the first Central Coast Economic Development Strategy, as well as adoption of the Central Coast Car Park Study and Implementation Plan, the Visitor Paid Parking Scheme, Racecourse Car Park, and Smart Parking Pilot in partnership with the New South Wales Government. There was the rollout of 29 solar installation projects working towards the Council's energy efficiency. We have achieved internal efficiencies through reduced IT annual operating costs by approximately $1 million due to renegotiation with IT vendors and a reduction in licence requirements. Implementation of a corporate asset management system to consolidate all assets into a single register and a single payroll solution. And lastly, of course, we have delivered an SRV application in a very short time frame. In fact, I'll go as far as to say a record time frame. With that, that's a summary of what has taken place over the last 12 months. And I think it's been a particular magnificent effort, and I have to congratulate the staff for being able to, during some pretty tough times, both internally and externally with COVID and floods, etc. I think the staff have done a fabulous job given the circumstances, and I'll certainly be leaving the inquiry to look at some of the determinations as to how some of the disastrous sides of what happened to us came about down the track. So I will now close the council meeting to actually convene the open forum, and with that I declare the open forum open, and we are here holding the open forum to hear from community members who have registered to speak. I'm looking forward to hear the view of, we have one tonight. We have Erin Kelly, who wants to speak about the Woy playground removal. And I just ask Erin just to be mindful of the fact that you are on the internet and that you can be looked at for defamation if you were to make any comments of that nature. So with that, I would ask Erin Kelly to come and address the council.
Okay, here I am. Good evening, all. So last Tuesday, Fisherman's Wharf was informed their Facebook followers that contractors engaged by council will be removing Pelican Park on Thursday. Within 24 hours, an online petition gathered more than 6,000 signatures opposing the removal of this iconic playground on Woy Woy's waterfront. Yesterday, council responded to public outcry by putting the planned demolition on hold to enable time to engage with the community. I would like to raise and seek further clarification for the following. The safety audit conducted by council referred to that Pelican Park does not meet the current Australian standards. When the park was constructed, it met the required standards at the time, and it does not need to meet the requirements of Australian Standard 4685.0 2017 playground equipment and surfacing unless the risk is deemed unacceptable. I'm requesting that the community is given the opportunity to review audit findings and the current risk treatment plan for Pelican Park before the planned removal of any play equipment. I also request that basic maintenance is to recommence at Pelican Park as soon as practicable to ensure that council is meeting their duty of care and the requirements for playground maintenance as directed in the Australian Standard under section 8.6 maintenance. If there is a tree impact in Pelican Park, the one that was referenced as heritage, if this is not heritage, could this be confirmed and potentially could tree roots be trimmed and the softball properly repaired in this area? Next, I'd just like to bring up that $105,000 was allocated to upgrade Pelican Park. Where has this money gone, or has it been reallocated to the Wharf development project under a change of scope that was recently released? I'd also like council to communicate details of consultation that occurred in regards to the siting and design of Anderson Memorial Park play space, and it is not on the Your Voice One Coast page or in the Wharf development plan and map that I provided council. In regards to the Anderson Memorial Park play space, a number of concerns have been raised. Firstly, around siting. The Bayview's, Bayview Pub, the smoking area for that pub is 8 metres from the boundary of that playground. The Water's Edge Motel balcony, which is used for crisis accommodation, overlooks the play space, and it's also within about 10 metres of that boundary as the crow flies. Potential misuse of the park by patrons from surrounding pubs and restaurants. And finally, the lack of lighting in the area may be creating a safety hazard. Next, I'd like to talk about the design. So it lacks inclusive play equipment. There is no seating inside the fenced area, and the established seating in the park it does not face faces the water. And the park does not reflect the strategy, the play-based strategy for like replacement also. So they are the main issues that I'd like to bring up about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin, and well spoken. I think we'll either ask Mr. Farmer or Ms. Vaughan to just give you some response now, but I have to say on behalf of council, I don't think it was our finest hour in this project. But I think we do have some issues we need to look at, and I think Mr. Farmer will possibly outline the way forward.
Thank you, Administrator. This playground relocation, I guess, was considered as part of the overall Woy Woy plan, which was consulted about 2 years ago through the Let's Talk Woy Woy process, where we received over 422 formal submissions from 294 stakeholders, with over 100 community members attending one of our 2 drop-in information centres. And that feedback identified a range of projects, including the new Wharf, road infrastructure improvements, place activation projects, and the formation of a Woy Woy Town Centre strategy and much more. Part of that plan was the relocation of the playground, and that was created essentially after an audit on the play spaces were conducted by an independent assessor, and that audit identified the number of components in the park didn't meet the current Australian standards, and that the play equipment had passed its useful life. Most important is that the tree roots from the taxidermed tree located adjacent to the play space impact on that play space. And I've got an image of not this particular tree, but the same species, which I'll just show on the screen. And its roots naturally grow up, and it grows up into the soft fall, but also not just the soft fall, all the other infrastructure in the park. So it was identified at the time that there was an intrinsic conflict between a play space or any sort of intensive infrastructure and that tree. And decision at that stage 2 years ago was made to relocate that playground to another location, remove that area, and only leave a small amount of infrastructure around that area near the tree and near the wharf. Obviously, this is an issue of significant concern to the community. We're not fixed on a solution, but we need everybody to understand what the implications are around there in terms of what are the safety issues, what are the maintenance issues, what are the restrictions that are created by that particular site, and what are the issues with the current site that's been relocated the playground to. So at this stage, we'll ensure that the playground is kept safe, that it is kept open while we go through a consultation process, and we work through what's the most appropriate solution for this community for a play space in that area, or play spaces in this area. It's not an easy situation. You know, some solutions are to remove the tree, and you know, a decision was made at the time that the tree should have been kept and we can move the playground. Maybe that's not the right answer. It isn't a heritage tree. It's just seen as a significant tree. It's a large tree that's obviously been there for some time, but it does create issues for soft fall play space in the area. So there is no significant rush, but ultimately we have to determine what the appropriate future of that play space is and that tree in that area. And we'll be doing that in consultation with the community. I don't think there's any intention at this stage to try and ram through any major changes, and the community should be comforted that there won't be any short-term decisions made. We'll consult, we'll consider all those issues, and then we'll very, very transparently determine what we're going to do in that space.
Thank you for that, Mr. Farmer. I actually think that's a very well explained situation there. I've been struggling to try and remember the name of those roots of the tree that go up into the air, they actually seek sunlight and oxygen from the air. So it's a peculiar thing. And being a botanist, I'm struggling to remember the damn name, and I should. But anyway, I can't. But thank you, Aaron, for coming along and presenting. And hopefully that at least eases your mind that anything's going to happen in the short term, and that
Fantastic.
we are talking to the community. So thank you for coming along. So with that, I'll now declare the open forum closed, and we will start to resume the ordinary council meeting in a moment. So I will now resume the ordinary council meeting, and item 1.1 is disclosures of interest. I have no issues to declare. I don't believe any of the executive have anything to declare. So we will receive that report and note that there were no disclosures of interest, no disclosures of interest. So we can record that as a decision of council. Item 1.2, confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. So I now can confirm that I've read the minutes and I was present, and I can confirm that the council does confirm the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 15th of June 2021, and will resolve that as a decision of council. Item 1.3 is a notice of intention to deal with matters in closed session. We do have one matter to consider in closed session. But I don't intend to go into confidential. What we will do when we come to that item, I will get the relevant executive just to explain what's going on in that particular item without breaching the confidential components. So we'll consider that towards the end of the meeting. So we'll move on to item perhaps the main item for the evening, which is item 2.1, the consideration of submissions and adoption of the operational plan for 21-22. We have one public speaker, Mr. Kevin Brooks, who wishes to address the council. Good evening, Kevin. I hope you're there, and you have 3 minutes. I think you're on, Kevin.
Good evening. Before I start, Rick, can you hear me, Rick?
Yes, we can indeed. Yep. Loud.
Before I start, I'd just like to wish everybody good health and hope that everybody's staying safe in these difficult times.
Thank you.
So I've lost 10 seconds there. Can you reset the clock?
I'm sure we can start the clock again. Started now.
Okay. So look, my concern with this this plan is it does not appear to fully reflect. It doesn't appear to be fully updated to reflect the recent IPART decision. The IPART, as you know, limited the rate hike to just 3 years. Yet all the long-term financial plans within the document show it being made permanent beyond 3 years. For example, on page 106, I quote, the 10-year forecast below includes the assumption council will apply for and be awarded a permanent 15% increase at expiration of the 3-year period. I can see no sound basis for that assumption. I believe the council is being financially responsible in not fully reflecting the IPART decision in these financial plans. The council seems to me to be in denial about the IPART ruling, not to mention the reality that applications for further rate hikes will be determined not by bureaucrats with respect, but by next year's election. Until then, I believe the council should respect the IPART decision, restricting the rate hike to 3 years, and plan to live within its means. Instead, the council appears to be planning for possible insolvency sometime in 2024-25. On its present course, if IPART maintains its current ruling, the council may again face the embarrassment of being unable to make payroll. And this time there'll be no councillors to blame in absentia. We've seen this misplaced confidence before. The previous administrator toured media outlets, assuring everyone he knew how IPART worked and a permanent SRV could be assumed a certainty. He got less than a third of what he asked for. And it's easy to see why. If you look at the live feed of the council meeting of 23rd of March, you will see about 36 minutes in the CFO saying that the SRV was only intended to pay back about 110 million of the money needed to pay back loans for restricted funds, with the rest coming from asset sales and other sources. So why apply for a permanent SRV raising 300 million over 10 years? That's why IPART ruled that you only needed a third of it. In several places in this document, the council claims employee numbers have fallen from 2,500 to a pre-merger level of 2,000. This ignores the fact the administrator has already conceded 200 of those positions were already vacant, and Mr. Person's 30-day report puts the pre-merger figure not at 2,000, but at 1,875. So on those numbers, the council still has more employees than it had pre-merger, yet is delivering fewer services given all the recent service cuts. IPART rightly, in my view, criticised the council on productivity in its final report, and it has asked the council to use the breathing space of a 3-year SRV to improve this area. IPART believes the council should do more with less, not less with more. And I'll just end by saying that I think it's time the council respected the umpire's decision. And that means deferring over this document until the longer term financial plans have been fully updated to reflect IPART's decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I will address some of the comments you're making when I speak, and I share some of your thinking, but possibly and probably not all of it. But I do take your comments on board, and I do concur with you that our plan does show the IPART decision continuing on in order to make our 10-year financial plan work. If you take that out, it clearly doesn't work to the extent that we require. But I will go through some of these other points, but thank you, Kevin, for your contribution. As usual, it's succinct and pretty accurate, but a couple of points I will beg to differ with you on. But I will talk to the plan in a moment. So with that, I'd like to move on and talk to the paper. And before I do talk to the paper, and I get the executive and the CEO to talk about some of the changes that have been made and the impacts that it will concur, I want to set the scene first. So I want to remind the community of the circumstances that have led to the presentation of this plan for adoption. The previous administrator and myself, and as the acting CEO, were appointed at the beginning of November last year in response to the minister, suspending the councillors for 3 months. That was later extended for a further 3 months to make a total of 6 months. This was in response to the council being in a position of not being able to pay the next week's wage bill of approximately $5 million. Now, in the period leading up to this, the council had spent considerably more than they were earning. So as at November last year, the organisation had negative working capital or unrestricted cash of approximately $200 million. In a private sector sense, the council was completely and utterly broke. Now, when you lose the money, something has to actually pay for it. So this was actually paid for by raiding the externally and internally restricted reserves, which was unlawful. So there were 6 clear areas where the expenditure occurred. The first one was funding successive losses from 2017 onwards. The second one was spending an extra $70 million on capital works in 2018-2019. The third one was adding approximately 600 new positions and provisionally providing funding for them. The fourth one was adding a further $25 million to the employee cost line when they harmonised the wages and salaries between Gosford and Wyong. The salaries appeared to have been automatically harmonised at the high end. And then the fifth one is IPART removed $39 million of income, and that was largely due to an inadequate IPART application by the new council. And then the sixth reason was we did have a major impact from floods, fires and COVID. So those were the reasons why the council spent more money. Now, immediate actions were put in place to address the shortfall, which included immediately reducing the capital expenditure by approximately $50 million and sourcing a $50 million loan, which was necessary to be able to pay creditors and staff through to December. And we worked during that period with the unions on longer term financial strategies to put in place by Christmas to enable us to secure a further $100 million loan. So these included a restructuring program, which reduced the overall workforce from approximately 2,550 in nominated terms to less than 1,900, which was over 600 positions reduced. Other measures which were put in place in order with the agreement of the bank was limiting the capital expenditure, largely funded by the depreciation line for this year's budget, to $175 million. We also had to reduce the materials and contracts budget by approximately $20 million. And of course, we sought a 10-year SRV application for 15%. We undertook to the bank, we'd have an asset sales program of some $60 million, and that will help us produce a 10-year financial long-term plan of consistent surpluses totaling $110 million, which would go towards repaying the unlawfully used funds. And the balance towards the 200 would be coming from the asset sales and unwinding some of the internally restricted reserves. Now, we have implemented that. All with the exception, we're very close to the asset sale program of 60 million, but the staff have been downsized. Now, Kevin, of course, mentioned that the numbers were less than that, and he is absolutely correct, because the council back in probably around July, August last year did put in place a non-replacement program. So by the time we came to actually taking people out, we were talking just under 300 people that actually left the organisation. As prior to that, a number of people had already decided to bail out. So implementation has been completed, basically all bar one. The budget now shows a small surplus of 7 million. However, IPART only gave a 3-year SRV increase of 15%. And I will speak more about that later. But many, like Kevin, argued in the community that there was no need for a rate increase and that we could do it by other means. However, in the timeframes we had, there was no other measures to be able to get within a 4 to 5 month period, get the numbers down to be able to satisfy the bank. So the only way we could do it without the SRV would have been closure of libraries, pools and other councils' facilities, as well as considerably less expenditure on the maintenance of roads and parks, etc. With the 15% increase, we have avoided cuts of that nature. But the loss of some 600 positions and $20 million reduction in materials and contracts does mean there has been a loss of service. And the CEO and directors will explain some of those measures shortly. From Kevin's concerns that this could be solved in other means, yes, productivity could come into play. But one of the things that he may not have considered was the 25 extra million that came from harmonising wages and salaries. And the staff numbers have come down to slightly below the reported figures of both Wyong and Gosford of 2016. So we are down to the same number of staff, but we are probably higher just on $25 million of costs alone, and we have lost $39 million of revenue at this point of time from water and sewer. So it's unfortunate that other leaders in the community do not seem to grasp the severity of the situation, and they've argued against a rate increase without any realistic suggestions for increasing revenue or decreasing cost. And because of that, this has no doubt contributed to IPART's decision to limit the rate increase to 3 years. There's also no doubt they were keen to see that we could actually deliver the cost reductions that we said we would do. So with that, I will pause and I will ask the CEO to quietly lead us through the budget as to what some of the changes are and what some of the comments from the submissions were.
Thank you, Administrator. And clearly we haven't colluded in what we're going to say, because I was going to repeat many of the things that you had just said. But
Apologies.
I was just going to say that, look, this budget, operational plan and budget has been done in the context of major losses over the last 2 years, which have threatened the viability of the council, and council was able to trade through those losses by unwittingly and unlawfully using restricted funds to pay the bills. And as as a result of that, a major change process was put in place, and we've seen a major reduction in staff numbers. In simple terms, the 600 were positions, probably half of which were filled and the other half which were unfilled, which means we've actually seen about just short of 300 people leave the organisation, actual people. We've also reduced our other costs and have curtailed our capital program to conserve cash and to limit the growth in depreciation. Together, these changes have addressed around 70% of the shortfall to bring the council's budget back to balance. And this is an organisation that had lost $89 million in the 1920 year and was well on path to lose in excess of $100 million in the current financial year, the year that's just finishing. The balances had to be made up by a special rate variation of 15%, which has been granted by IPART for the next 3 years. And it's in the context of this that the operational plan and budget has been presented to council. It's a plan of constraint and caution, one that has been developed in the context of an unprecedented financial crisis. And the administrator mentioned in Canberra, we were the centre of a lot of discussion, and in fact, in the address by the president of the Australian Local Government Association to the National Press Club, our particular financial situation was the sole organisational financial stress mentioned in that particular matter. So, our situation, people locally shouldn't underestimate how severe the situation has been, and frankly, how significant our response has been. I've worked and led councils for over 23 years. Mr. Hart's been leading councils for best part of 2 decades or maybe even longer, and I've never seen a significant reduction in costs like I've seen in this circumstance. Mind you, I've never seen such a severe financial situation as has occurred. And had that financial situation not occurred, Mr. Hart wouldn't be in his seat and I wouldn't be in my seat. We're here for a very specific purpose. There are, even though we've had to develop a budget and an operational plan around caution and constraint, there still are some significant highlights and some significant adjustments. So I'll firstly ask Mr. Cox to outline the submissions process and the significant changes to the plan that were made as a result of those submissions and changing environment. And then he can pass to other directors to talk about changes and the implications of the budget and operational plan in their areas.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer, and through you, Mr. Administrator. Following 28 days of community consultation, the operational plan and fees and charges for 21-22 financial year received a total of 140 submissions. And of those submissions, the key issues raised were objection to the SRV, commentary around the asset sales program, a number of objections to the entrance library closure, and requests for more funding to be allocated to the libraries in general. There was an objection to fees, including the Gosford City Car Park fees, sports ground fees and childcare fees. There was a request for additional capital projects to be considered or further funding to be allocated. Some of the changes made to the final operational plan based on some of the submissions we received include, and also in respect of a number of events that occurred, that confirmation of IPART's approval of the 15% rate increase is for only 3 years. Updating the capital works program with projects continuing from the 2020-21 and grant funded projects. This means that the capital works budget for 21-22 has increased by $1.5 million to $175 million. This included the inclusion of fully grant funded projects, which won't have an impact on council's bottom line. Other changes to the fees and charges included regulatory fee updates to water, sewerage, stormwater drainage and ancillary services, regulatory fee updates to waste levies, and amendments and clarifications to headings and to some of the descriptions. The changes that have occurred between the draft and the final document have not impacted on council's bottom line, with a $666.8 million in operational revenue forecast and expenditure of $659.8 million on service and operational costs. This will still result in a $7 million surplus, excluding capital grants and contributions. In summary, whilst there have been some reductions, this operational plan still plans to deliver a range of projects and programs for the community. I'll just highlight some of those programs for the Environment and Planning Directorate. Some of these include, in the strategic planning unit, consolidation of the 7 and 11 developer contributions plans. We currently have 53 of them and we're working on consolidating them to a reasonable number. Delivery of stage 1 of the housing strategy and delivery of the deferred lands matters into the Central Coast LEP template. We will also be delivering our public health programs. In terms of environmental programs, we will be delivering the coastal management program. We will be delivering a responsible pet ownership program policy. There will be $2.6 million spent on a range of environmental restoration fund projects around Tuggerah Lakes and also at Avoca Lagoon. There will be implementation of a number of the actions in the biodiversity strategy. There will be 5,000 cubic metres of wrack removal around Tuggerah Lakes. We will continue on with our berm management strategy for the entrance channel to mitigate flooding and also for coastal erosion. There will be money set aside for a long-term solution at Wamberal Beach. There's also a report on Council's agenda tonight about sand nourishment opportunities at Wamberal Beach. And also we'll be looking at delivering a number of gross pollutant traps around our waterways on the Central Coast. And lastly, we look to finalise our environmental management system. I'll now pass on to Ms. Cowley to talk about some of the highlights in the Corporate Affairs Directorate.
Thank you, Mr. Scott, and through you, Mr. Administrator. I'll just make a quick address to Mr. Kevin Brooks' comment on Council's use of application of the SRD for 10 years. I guess the document is called a long-term financial plan. The purpose of it is to forecast and to make a plan of financial sustainability. And just like any plan and any budget, you need to forecast for things that may not be 100% given and delivered at the time that you make the plan. This is no exception. Our plan is based on the need to have a 10-year or at least a permanent SRV, and the reference to the $110 million that was made needed the clarification in the fact that the comment about the $110 million was never in relation to revenue. It was in relation to operating result. And the reality is that, as described by the administrator, Council had $200 million deficit that we need to cover. The $110 million that is coming from the operating result is obviously not $200 million, which is the reason why when we look at the investment report, you will see that we still have currently unrestricted reserves. And therefore, they are being proposed to be funded through the property sales. But the reality is that without the SRV, Council can't meet its current proposed long-term financial plan. And so we are planning to, in the next couple of years, to still request an extension of the SRV. In terms of the impact of the operational plan on the Corporate Affairs Department, we have taken significant resources here because we are the overhead department of this organisation. So a lot of the work that we do will not be necessarily seen by the community, but it will be felt by the rest of the organisation in the level of service that we can provide to the same extent of what we used to provide them. So I want for the community with that, but this is a conversation that is being held with internally with all of my colleagues. And with that, I will pass to Mr. Bolgoff.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cowley, and through CEO to Mr. Administrator. Through this process, the infrastructure services area had 31 submissions to the operational plan. There was predominantly around, requesting additional capital works and the level of service around the road functions. In relation to some of those road functions, we've had to build this operational plan in the operational sense, with reduced funding in the materials and contracts and staff numbers. So what that means is there's going to be a reduction in the KPIs around complex investigation and traffic reviews. So some of those things will mean that things that would have been done within 3 months may take in the order of 6 to 12 months in those investigations. In the road related area, one example is probably the potholes. We do look at things and on a risk basis. So some of the lower risk potholes, that may have taken 3 months may take 6 to 12 months to have repaired. Having said that, we have gone through a severe storms, and we did 3,000 potholes in that particular period. And overall, we still hit the repaired 59,000 potholes in this current financial year with reduced materials and contracts and staff numbers. As mentioned, the capital works area is reducing as a result also of the public consultation process. Projects such as a roundabout at Bindilla and Ocean Parade, the entrance, was taken out of the operational plan on the CapEx component due to public concerns. And as Mr. Cox was saying, that was linked in through work that we'll be doing with the developer contributions review, so that we'll review that entire plan. Some increases in relation to capital works, which is welcomed, is that we have received some local roads and community infrastructure funding. As Mr. Cox has said, that is grant funding, and that was added to the capital works plan, and that brings it up to a total for the council of $175 million. In doing some of that capital works, we will achieve over 35 kilometres of road renewal and reconstruction. There's also going to be some signature projects in shared paths, so we have that active transport component, significant investments of over $8 million, which will achieve work along Wharf Barrett Drive at Magenta. We'll be continuing the Tuggerong Foreshore pathway, as well as Malinia Road, Davistown. The waste services area, obviously there's no reductions in that. That will continue with the yellow bin, red bin and green bin, and our waste facilities at Woy Woy remain open and intact, and as well as Buttondry. And the major project at Buttondry will be the continuing of the cell development to make sure that we're sustainable into the future. On that note, I might pass to Miss Julie Vaughan, through the Administrator and CEO, Director of Community and Recreational Services.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Administrator, my department is Community and Recreation Services, and I have 4 distinct units. I've previously provided updates to Council on the impact of some of the service reductions, which are significant for my department due to the nature of the types of services and activity we provide. Very much a front-facing part of an arm of the organisation. So I will remind the community of some of the reductions as they will be very evident, but there are also, as other directors have shown, some significant projects that will continue to happen alongside our regular core business. So whilst there has been a reduction in our community grants program by 40%, we've just recently opened our 2021 round, and I'm pleased to advise that we're having record number of responses and uptake. So obviously a much anticipated response. We have had a 30% reduction in our community development and placemaking activities, and this also extends to our town centre services. So there will be a revised focus to our primary support of town centres, and that will focus on where town centre levies are collected, being the entrance, Wyong, Gosford and Toukley. So in those areas alone, there will be up to a 40% reduction in some of our core activities, such as cleaning, maintenance and landscaping. I've previously advised a number of the council events that won't be able to continue, and some of those include New Year's Eve at Gosford, Australia Day at the entrance and Australia Day at Toukley, as well as 50% reduction in our school holiday programs. But as you would have just recently seen, we've had a record-breaking Harvest Festival held over the June long weekend, and we have upcoming events on our regular programs such as Chrome Fest and Lakes Festival this year alone to look forward to, COVID pending. From a capital works perspective, there will be, although a significant reduction in our town centre upgrades program, there is still significant spread of small capital work improvements that will be seen within our town centres. For our libraries and education unit, as we've previously proposed, we are recommending that the entrance library close. As Mr. Cox has noted, there has been, and as the administrator as well, we've received overwhelming response and concern about the closure of the library. So some of the actions that we are putting into place to respond to that is to provide services through the Visitor Information Centre. So we will be providing 2 public access computers. We will be having mobile visits of our mobile outreach van, and that provides the opportunity for residents to still get access to loans of books and DVDs. We will also be providing customer service outlet at the Visitor Information Centre for up to 14 hours per week. So whilst the library is recommended to close, there will still be the key elements currently provided at the entrance library, relocating down to the Visitor Information Centre. And it's also worthy to note that residents can also pay for services for council at the Australia Post outlets on alternate days. There has also been in that particular unit a reduction of 20 places at our Canwell Little Coast Kids service. The good news for library and education is obviously the continual planning for the regional library, and we are on schedule with designs and DA preparation for that to be open in early 2024. For the leisure, beach and safety and community facilities unit, we're still recommending the closure of the creche service at Lake Haven Recreation Centre. The impacts for that broader unit will be that we have no dedicated CCTV officers. We have had a reduction in our bookings officers, so that will mean a delay in being able to issue leases and licenses, and we've had a reduction in our senior centres, primarily at Gosford and Adelong, and we are working with the community to explore some other operating models. In that particular unit, we will be seeing different levels of upgrades though at each of our pools and leisure centres throughout the next year, and upgrades of 7 community facilities. For our open space and recreation unit, as previously advised, the impacts are significant. So we will be seeing a 33% reduction in our weekday litter collection, 50% reduction 50% reduction in the level of service for our lower level parks, a 50% reduction in our level of service for our major roads, including Arimbra Strait, Sparks Road, Wyong Road, Tuggerah Strait and Southern State Roads. Our laneways will be mowed only every 12 to 16 weeks in peak season. Mowing periods will be reduced by 8 weeks a year to only 4 months. We'll have reduced amenity in town centres, car parks and roadsides. There'll be no street planting. We would have reduced maintenance on sports fields surrounds during peak season. Substantial reduction in community support for community gardens, and any available funding will be focused on safety first. However, noting whilst there are significant reductions in the level of service, I'm also pleased to advise that there'll be a number of upgrades to our assets to ensure that we are able to maintain them. So 12 play spaces will be upgraded, 2 new skate parks will be developed, and we will have upgrades to 30 sports grounds. Thank you, Mr. Administrator, and I'll pass you to Mr. Loader.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughan, and through you, Mr. Administrator. The Water and Sewer Directorate will continue to live within the constraints of the last year of the current IPART pricing determination. It's been well publicised, the impact that has had on the organisation. What that means for us in terms of our operations and maintenance unit, our focus will be on repairing main breaks as they occur and responding to customer complaints. Reactive works will take priority over scheduled maintenance as we don't have sufficient resources to do both. Timeframes for response to lower priority issues have been pushed out. That's our P3 and P4 tasks, and these may take up to a month to complete. Restoration works following main breaks may also take longer to complete and may not be to the same standard initially. Our focus at this point in time will be on making safe, and we'll come back and repair the damage completely at a later stage. From our headworks and treatment unit, we'll continue to maintain our drinking water quality within the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines, and our sewage effluent will continue to be treated in accordance with the environmental limits on our environmental protection licences. Urgent maintenance works at a number of our treatment plants will still need to be carried out. However, this will be at the expense of our proactive maintenance program, as this will have to be pushed out or delayed so we can accommodate the more urgent works. And our water education programs are also going to be significantly reduced. On a positive note, however, Water and Sewer is delivering the bulk of the capital works program for Council in the next financial year. That includes $10.2 million of grant-funded new infrastructure in the Gosford CBD, also $5.9 million of new grant-funded infrastructure in the Warnervale Town Centre. There's $7.8 million to be spent on the first year of a 3-year project to upgrade the Marty Water Treatment Plant. Approximately 4 kilometres of water mains will be replaced across the region, excuse me, to the value of around $7 million. Approximately 15 kilometres of gravity sewer will be relined, $5.8 million, and we'll also be upgrading 6 sewer pump stations at the value of $6.9 million. The focus for the Water and Sewer Department certainly for the next few months and the coming year will be on completing our pricing submission to IPART, which is due in September, and assisting IPART and their consultants through the remainder of that determination process leading up to a decision in May next year. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
I think that completes the reports from most of the directors on the way forward. I just have one question for Ms. Vaughan. In the media today, there was a suggestion that the library the entrance was being closed because of the merger between the former Wyong and Gosford councils. Is that true?
Through you, Mr. Administrator. No, obviously the current financial situation has made us look at the efficiency of all of our services, but the viability of the entrance library was formally investigated under the former Wyong Council. So in 2015, a library strategy was developed, and at that stage, many of the issues that have influenced our decision to recommend that to close continue to remain. So it identified that the current site for the library was not a suitable site, that the level of loans were way below what would be reasonable, and that the key elements that the community were seeking in that area related to the public PCs and customer service functions. So no, that's not correct. It is something that has been previously considered and presented to the former Wyong Council.
Thank you for clearing that up. Now, I have considered all the submissions and the officers' comments and the budget as a whole. I'm clearly in a position, having been the former CEO, of really fully understanding the financial situation that we're actually in and the agreements that we have with the banks that support us and the way forward that we have agreed with them. I think this budget fits that as it is. It does do a lot of things, as the executive pointed out, but it also does mean there are going to be some cuts and shortfalls, which the previous administrator and I alluded to right from the beginning. So I intend to adopt the budget as that. I do want to add a couple of things in, one extra resolution vis-a-vis the entrance library, and I'll just read that out and we'll cover that off when we look at the whole, close all the resolutions at the end. But I just want to add in the council note that upon closing the entrance library, council will continue to provide a customer service outlet, an ability for customers to pay bills at a reduced level of service though, for 14 hours per week, and 2 public access computers at the Visitor Information Centre in the entrance, as well as there being visits from our mobile library service. So I just want that added in as a recommendation to go in, just to cement in that we are going to keep something going in the entrance, because I'm very cognizant of the fact that, you know, we are removing a service there and there are some people who have been relying on it. So it's an unfortunate thing, but our financial situation and the way we have to head now just mean we have to make some tough decisions. Now, the other matter I do want to talk about is I mentioned I would bring up the subject of IPART yet again. I think the situation that Mr. Brooks outlined, where he believes we could live without the SRV of 27 million that we're getting for the next 3 years, is a little bit, as I said earlier, doesn't really grasp the realities of the life we're in. If we were to, as Mr. Brooks suggested, lose that 27 million, it would mean that we've taken approximately $100 million out of the costs of this organisation. And the organisation, I have to say, under any circumstances, whatever productivity gains you make, you would not be able to deliver remotely the level of services we do if we were to lose in total $100 million out of the revenue streams. So I fear that whilst I agree with him that productivity is definitely something which we can improve upon, and I know that the CEO, Mr. Farmer, is already considering ways to improve productivity in the council, taking away that core revenue stream would make it actually impossible. Now, there are other problems that I want to address here. The council was absolutely in receivership. And as I mentioned, the government made it clear to us in the early days, particularly myself as the CEO, that we would need to solve our problem of being in receivership by actually resolving to do it on using commercial solutions. So that means we had to go to approach the banks. The government believed we could increase our revenue streams because we have the powers to tax. And that is true, except for the fact that it is regulated by IPART. So in actual fact, as we have just seen, we do not actually have those powers to be able to do that. We have a regulator who controls us. So in a commercial sense, we had to go to the bank to get an agreement as to what we could do so that they would support us with lending us $100 million. Clearly, whatever we did, we had to downsize the organisation. To do that, pay out staff and everything else costs money. So we had to borrow more money to do that, i.e. that was the 100 million. So the agreement reached with the bank I've spoken about many times. We had to approximately do $60 million of asset sales. We had to produce a surplus for 10 years. And I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks, but we cannot do that if we drop $27 million off the revenue line from year 3 onwards. We also had to reduce our costs and structure. So we have achieved that, as I pointed out. And of course now, just as we get ourselves sorted out and we've got a plan that goes forward, which I think is acceptable to the community in the light which we find ourselves, but it now is constrained by IPART's decision to only give us 3 years. It places our agreement with the banks in jeopardy. Now, I understand that IPART want to see us progress forward, but unfortunately, so does the bank. and so does the state government, that most recently asked us if we had any money left over from the money that we'd borrowed, could we repay the government early as a sign of goodwill. Now, it is impossible to run an organisation of this size and shape coming out of a receivership and be asked to give money in goodwill, be told your revenue is going to be cut by $27 million from year 3 onwards, and at the same time find commercial solutions to get your money, to get your funds required to get the business back on track. So I have to say, those are some concerns and some constraints that we find ourselves upon. And the other issues that will come up is that the termination of the SRV in 3 years' time, council actually needs a minimum of 10 years. Since the $150 million we've taken in loans, which was the $50 million I mentioned right at the beginning, and the last $100 million, amortised over 15 years. And we have to pay back interest and capital payments throughout. And those payments, we've already had to make payments in November and December 2020, and we're going to have to make payments in the next few years in terms of capital repayments. Now, if we can't do that and we don't get the SRV, we will turn that $110 million surplus that we are projecting to a $75 million loss across those 10 years. That is a $185 million loss turnaround in 10 years. And we can no way can we sustain that or pay for it using unrestricted cash. So we will not be able to meet our loan terms without an extension of the SRV. And this thus it puts us at risk of bank foreclosures down the track. We would need to restructure the organisation, approximately cost us perhaps another $25 to $30 million a year if we lost the SRV, and that would be catastrophic to the council, the region and to the community. So I personally believe that terminating the SRV after 3 years is fiscally, economically and culturally irresponsible. And I do want to make sure that we live within our means over the next period. So I do hope that the leaders in our community out there who hitherto have argued strongly against the rate increase will now support a continuation with this SRV to enable us to meet our commitments to the bank that support council, to provide certainty to the staff and the community that the current services, not improved ones, the current services can at least continue at their current levels. And to make sure, again, that we can tap into both state and Commonwealth funding. A lot of that requires co-funding, and at this point in time, without further authorisation of the SRV, I cannot, as Mr. Brooks quite clearly pointed out and quite correctly pointed out, you cannot enter into arrangements and agreements when you are not secure with your income. So in good faith, I would not be able to enter into agreements with those other tiers of governments in joint funded projects until I've got secure income for the future. So we have some risks to the plan. The risks, of course, is that termination of the approved 3 years. As you know, we do rely on that for throughout the 10 years. So it would be a major risk and a problem for the organisation if we didn't get it. We would also have had issues if we had a significant COVID impacts and more bushfires or East Coast lows or any other natural disasters. And also we could get, we have an application in for IPART to normalise the water and sewer annual charges to approximately where they were a couple of years ago. And even if we didn't get that, we're in particular issues. So with that, I also just want to remind, unfortunately, take the opportunity, I should say, because I've experienced it many times, and I know Mr. Farmer has experienced many times, but I do want to publicly say to the organisation that it's important that when we're raising purchase orders, that they are raised before the purchases are actually made. And I want to make sure that the orders are receipted properly and not dragged into following months or even indeed into the following year, and that recruitment is done within the guidelines that we've set down in the budget and within the adopted organisational charts, because it is imperative that we live within our means over the next period to be able to demonstrate to IPART whenever we go for the extension to the 3 year period, that we are able to live within our means. Also, it is important for the banking industry to understand that we are able to meet the commitments and undertakings that we gave to them in order to raise those new loans. So with that, I want to add another couple of resolutions in to the overall number of resolutions. And that would be, firstly, that Council seek an urgent meeting with the Chair of IPART to discuss a further application being made for the continuation of the 15% SRV beyond 3 years. And the last one is that Council write to the Coordinator General Planning, Delivery and Local Government outlining where Council does not receive certainty of revenue beyond 3 years, our inability to plan for the future and enter into funding agreements puts the organisation and its services to the community at risk. So with that, I'm going to pass the resolutions that now includes those last three, and as shown on the screen, and I will adopt those as a decision of Council. I now move on to item 2.2, which is the making and fixing of the 2021-22 rates and charges. So I'll ask the CFO to just take us through that paper and recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report seeks the adoption of ordinary rates, special rates and waste management annual charges for the 21-22 rating year. Ordinary and special rate ad valorem amounts are reflective of the 2% rate peg increase and also the 13% special rate variation, which altogether make the 15% increase as approved by IPART. The main three drivers of these rates are harmonisation, minimum rates and special rates, and I'll go through them in a little more detail. Rate harmonisation means that the rates will be calculated in the same way across the Central Coast to ensure that rate levels are fair and equitable. At the time of amalgamation, ratepayers from the former Wyong Shire Council had their own special rate variation, which was existing for 3 years, and each of those 3 years they paid 6.9% per year. So as a result, they have been paying higher rates than those in the former Gosford City Council for a property of equivalent value due to the fact that there was a New South Wales government rate freeze for amalgamated councils. This harmonisation exercise ensures that the rates for similar properties are similar across the council, and it removes the inequality between residents of the former Wyong Shire Council and the former Gosford City Council. The harmonisation in itself does not, however, generate any additional income for council. So while we may have that well documented and discussed and media reported 42% increase in for some residential customers, the impact of that is because the Wyong Shire Council residents have actually been subsidising those 42% increases that should have been paid by Gosford. The amount by which a ratepayer's rates will change will depend on two factors. Number one, the land value, and number two, whether the property is in the former Wyong Shire or the former Gosford City Council area. So as mentioned earlier in media releases, on average, property owners in the former Wyong will see a decrease in ordinary rates, while property owners in the former Gosford will see an increase in ordinary rates. It is important also to highlight at this point that a couple of years ago, water and sewer as part of the IPART determination had a $39 million decrease in the revenue that the council was generating from the water and sewer fees and charges. So the community had received a $39 million reduction in that, in the rates that they were paying for water and sewer. This increase from the SRV of $23 million, or 27 including the rate peg, is less than the $39 million that council lost as part of the IPART determination for water and sewer a couple of years ago, and therefore it represents a smaller increase than what the community had already had benefited from the decrease that they've had 2 years ago. In terms of minimum rates, the resolutions for the making of the rates are subject to a number of specific requirements, and one of those requirements under Section 548 of the Law of Government Act is that that the minimum rate that can be imposed when the rate includes an ad valorem amount is $565. So for council, the minimum rate set out in our proposed resolution complies with this requirement. In terms of special rates, council is keeping and continuing the special rates that the council had previously adopted, but it is proposing to align the structure of the special rates by removing the base amount from the entrance Tukli and Wyong special rates. And finally, the ad valorem amounts placed on public exhibition were calculated based on the unimproved land values in rating categories as of December 2020. The ad valorem amounts in this report have been calculated based on the unimproved land values in rating categories as of May 2021. So if there are some minor movements in the numerics, they're driven by this reason. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you for that, Ms. Cowley. Yes, it's interesting because clearly I think people are going to notice, of course, the change and when they get their rate bill, and it's unavoidable. I believe I'm correct in saying that 15 out of the 17 merged towns have done the same thing as we have done, which is do the move in 1 year as opposed to spreading it out over a number of years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to say, my own council area where I live, which is the Northern Beaches, being I'm a Pittwater resident, I'm happy to say that my rates are going down at the expense of Manly, which I'm not unhappy about, I have to say. So it's happening to all of us. So with that, I will now resolve to adopt the resolutions. As they are shown on the screen, there is quite a large number of them. That is to cover off all the fees and charges that are associated with the Community Strategic Plan. We'll now move to item 2.3, which is the investment report for May 2021. And I'll just again ask Ms. Cowley, the CFO, just to say a few words there. But I think, Ms. Cowley, if you could highlight for people who are maybe watching on the internet and stress the position of our negative unrestricted cash position and how that continues to haunt us, and how the projections, looking for going into the future, I think something that Mr. Brooks has missed out on in his calculations.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I completely agree. So I'd like to draw your attention to page 2 of the investment report. There is a very clear table that breaks down council's funds between the general fund, the water fund, sewer fund, drainage fund, and waste fund. So there are the 5 funds that make the consolidated position of council. And if you do look at the row that is called unrestricted funds in bright red font, you could see that 3 of the 5 funds find themselves still in an unrestricted funds deficit, meaning we don't have cash available in those particular funds, and that is not surprising. It is not surprising because in October, when we were at the peak of our financial crisis, so it was well documented that our unrestricted funds balance deficit was $200 million. We have taken $150 million in loans, 50 of which was needed directly for operational expenses. 100 was placed against these unrestricted funds. And so if you do look at the general fund, water fund, drainage fund, the accumulation of those numbers at the moment are about 70 to 73, 75, about $75 million in deficits. Those numbers do fluctuate on a monthly basis. Last month, you might have seen in the loan report when we disclosed this was about $85 million between the general fund and the drainage fund. There is some variation. I'm expecting a variation between $70 to $90 million in deficits, and that is essentially the amount that we are looking to be able to refund through the property sales and the rest of it through the loans. But if I continue into the investment report, you would see that, as mentioned just earlier, the negative unrestricted balance this month has reduced by $8.5 million since last month. In terms of the consolidated funds that we have, there's $483 million in consolidated funds, and that includes the restrictions and unrestricted funds, and that is for the consolidated entity. So it does include water and sewer. We provide the portfolio movements, and one of the main areas that I use to track the performance of the cash in this organization is how it tracks against the benchmarks. And if the internet will catch up a little bit faster with what I'm trying to do, I'll be able to tell you that the portfolio return at the moment is above the benchmark of, it's just coming at a glacial pace. The weighted running yield for May of 1.09% for the Central Coast is favorable compared to the benchmark bill rate of 0.87%. So I'm quite satisfied that we are performing above the regulated and the benchmark rates. One of the key things that I wanted to highlight also is that during May, Council's total investment, cash and investments increased by $17 million for the month with the receipt of the quarterly rate installments. And this increase was offset in part by the balloon repayments of the loans for the General Fund Drainage Fund of 6.2, which Council approved at the previous Council meeting. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Carley. I have to say the reporting, I think, is good now. And I think I would encourage people again who might be watching that table on page 2 is the table that should be being watched and looked at very closely by councillors in the future and by the community to keep track of what is actually happening with our cash position. Because just in case people aren't aware, really the only reason you go broke is when you do not have any cash in the bank to pay your bills. It's as simple as that, and the council is no different. So whilst we have negative cash positions in the unrestricted cash or our working capital area, we are still in a difficult position where we're struggling to be able to pay our bills as they fall due. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll adopt the resolution that's shown on the screen to receive the investment report for May 2021. Item 2.4, the Administrator Expenses and Facilities Report to 30th of April 2021. I think the paper is self-explanatory. It just covers the period with the previous administrator and the sums are extremely modest. So I now resolve to adopt the resolution that's shown on the screen there. Item 2.5, which is the pecuniary interest disclosure returns, the recently appointed designated persons. I am one of those, the CEO is one of those. Our returns are documented as according to the Act, and I will pass the resolution that Council receive the report on the returns for the recently appointed designated persons. We then move to item 2.6, and I believe we may have a speaker here, Mr. Peter Gillis, whom we shall wait to hear from. This is the request to prepare a planning proposal for 4349 the Esplanade Ettalong Beach, item 2.6.
Mr. Gillis, could you please accept the ask to unmute button?
Unmute, hang on. It says unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
We're all ready to go, are we? Okay.
Yep, we can hear you now, and your 3 minutes starts from now.
Thank you very much. Okay. My name's Peter Gillis, and I'm the spokesman for Ettalong Residents Group Red. And this proposal is to increase the zone height from 11.5 metres to 17 metres for blocks to the east of the recently built Atlantis building in Ettalong Beach, plus increase the floor space ratio from 1:1 to 1.75 to 1. The blocks in question currently have a total road frontage of 122 metres and an area of 3,218 square metres. Now, we would have made representations to the LPP at their 10 June meeting, but this item is not listed on their agenda, unfortunately. The LPP supports this proposal with qualifications, notably overshadowing, view sharing, separation and setbacks. Now, the residents are opposed to this proposal for the following reasons. A height of 17 metres will constitute a block of high-rise building adjacent to the waterfront, continuing eastward from the Mantra and Atlantis buildings. There would be a significant shading issues on the Esplanade and bushland area adjacent to the beach. The Atlantis building demonstrates this now. The scale of building is not consistent with the surrounding area. It continue the high-rise development concept of Atlantis. The development plan of this height could not possibly accommodate view sharing since all adjacent buildings except Atlantis are substantially lower. An FSR of 1.75 to 1 is excessive. It would make it impossible to comply with setback and other requirements. Ettalong Beach is a village tourist centre with a severely limited parking and road infrastructure. This development will further impact local amenity and reduce tourist appeal. We have developments already underway which will have a huge impact on infrastructure. This proposal should be rejected pending a comprehensive strategic development plan for the area rather than on a site-by-site basis. Now, I bring your attention to my submitted documents. If you have a look at page 2, it shows our commercial corridor built at a full height of 17 metres. That's the red blocks on that diagram. The purple blocks are high rises under development, and in the foreground you can see Atlantis in brown, and this current proposal is in blue. Now, if you turn, you can see that they're quite substantial. If you turn to the photo on page 3, it's an actual view from the north of the existing buildings. You can see that this proposal would continue the high rise from the left side of Atlantis all the way to Picnic Parade, the far left road in the photo. This is more than twice the width of the Atlantis in the photo. So we urge you to reject this proposal. The height and FSR would lead to a huge development with massive impacts and would not be in the best interest of the Ettalong Beach community. Thank you very much.
Thank you for a good, clear presentation. I'm going to Mr. Cox and thank you for sending in your submission. It makes it much easier for us to respond to it.
Yes.
So, Mr. Cox, can you address some of Mr. Gillis' concerns and also just take us through what is exactly being proposed and perhaps answer some of the questions that he's raised.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Yes, Mr. Gillis makes some very good points, and the staff, when this proposal was initially lodged, looked at a number of those issues and have requested amendments be made to the concept plan. Those amendments were made, particularly in terms of the floor space ratio. It was reduced, and as part of those requests, within the concept there are single story elements, particularly with the podium. The 17-metre height would only be applicable to two towers on the site, but the predominant podium will be single story to enable not only for setbacks for the rear lane and street frontages, but also through the middle of the site between the two towers as well. Also to the local planning panel, as Mr. Gillis mentioned, did give support to the proposal. However, they have in their advice also recommended that council staff reinforce those urban design controls and principles such as overshadowing and view sharing to be incorporated into a development control plan for the site, and also limit some overshadowing to the beach and bushland areas as well on the foreshore. This is just the preliminary step in a rezoning process. It would then need to go to be forwarded to the minister if it is adopted tonight, to seek a gateway determination. Within that gateway determination, there are further requirements such as additional studies. Whilst only preliminary planning studies have been submitted at this stage, there'll be more detailed studies such as traffic impacts, which Mr. Gillis mentioned, car parking, and a range of other urban design studies that need to be done. As part of a gateway determination, there is also a requirement for community consultation. So at that particular time, the community would then be asked to lodge a formal submission in response to the proposal. But just in terms of the proposal itself, the planning proposal seeks an increase in height from 11.5 metres to 17 metres. And as I said before, in the concept that 17 metres would only apply to the two towers being sought, and a floor space ratio increase from 1.1 to 1.75. There's also a public benefit being offered by the applicant for public domain improvements, which could be offered as part of a voluntary planning agreement. So staff would be looking at what further improvements could be made in the public domain around the Ettalong area. As I said before, the matter was referred to the local planning panel, and it identified that they support the strategic intent for the proposal.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Cox. So you're assuring me that we have taken into consideration what the planning panel recommended we do?
The recommendations will be going forward should a gateway be approved by the minister.
We will incorporate those through the, as you say, through the gateway process, and the gateway process does allow for full community submissions to go in at that point in time. So it's a preliminary step. So on the basis it's a preliminary step, and the community still has a further opportunity once it's gone through the gateway, then we can actually, I'm happy to authorise this process, part of the process, to enable it to proceed, and then we will see what the final thing looks like, and the community will be able to have their say at that point in time. But I take on board that the fact that there is a tiered down of height towards the coast, which is appropriate in my beliefs, and that the other issues are properly addressed, it's traffic, etc., and the other studies completed, then we'll see where that leads us. But for now, I'm happy to agree to the recommendations to prepare the planning proposal for 4349 the Esplanade and approve the resolutions as shown on the screen, and make those as a decision of council. Item 2.7, adoption of a works in kind policies. we have another speaker here, Mr. David Kitson, who I'll be happy to invite on to give us his views. And then I will ask Mr. Cox to just talk through briefly what it means and to be able to answer any concerns that Mr. Kitson may have.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. My name is David Kitson. I was formerly the manager of the Wyong Contributions Unit, which was disbanded after the amalgamation. It was my role to undertake the calculation of credits, and in my role, I also undertook the review of one of our district contribution plan. And reviewed all credits going back to the 1990s. So, and all properly recorded and given in accordance with the contributions plan. Look, I guess. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Oh. Hello, sorry, a bit of a technical difficulty there. Now, the issue is that, the issue is that there's been really no substantive reason why you would change an existing existing process that has kind of been working for over 25 years. There is really no substantiation about what benefit you will get by making every developer to enter into a works in kind agreement. Basically, there's a contribution plan. You calculate the contributions, and if they've done works in kind in accordance with the contributions plan, traditionally they have got the value of those works. To set up a whole new administrative process and that's the issue. What is the reason why you would set up a whole new administrative process that will cost developers in terms of having to go and get cost estimates, that will cost them in terms of legal advice and legal services. Some of the things that I guess the issue is that in this policy will, in the main, apply to the Warnervale district area, and if it is adopted as is, and every developer will have to enter into works in kind agreement under this policy, and they'll have to go and get cost estimates. Now, I guess the issue is what happens when those cost estimates come back and it says that the value of the work they're doing is more than what is in the plan. If you have a look at the commentary in the report, it says that a council is unlikely to agree to a contribution to a works in kind agreement if the value of the works is more than it's in the plan. So I guess you really have to ask why you're going through all this extra process. Look, there's always improvements you can make to internal processes. There's always and look, I guess the one good thing about this works in kind policy is setting the agenda to say that, well, if someone wants value that is more than what is in the plan, they have to do a works in kind agreement, and presumably council will probably not be agreeable because it will result in an increase in the unfunded liability under the contribution plan. I suggest that, really councillors being guided here by consultants, and I don't believe there is no requirement under the Act or any guidelines that requires these works in kind agreements to be formal legal works in kind agreements to be undertaken with developers in respect to credits for the works in kind. I suggest that it is the flavour of the month for some consultants, but I think it may be appropriate in some circumstances. But having regard to the fact that the Warnervale District Contribution Plan takes contributions from for the upgrading of a existing rural road network, which means that every developer will be caught by this plan, and unnecessarily so, because it is really an accounting exercise, and the extra cost, time delay, is something that council should be very concerned about. I think that's probably, and look, I guess the response given to some of the issues in the report are, I would suggest are fairly glib. I think, the comment that, works in kind agreements aren't compulsory, and that, there are other options. Well, the other options is that under this draft policy is that...
Time up, Mr. Kitson. I did give you a little bit of grace.
Yep, that's right.
Because of your technical issues.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. The other alternative is that basically they don't get the credit for the work that they've done. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and thank you for making the time to come on. Mr. Cox, can you try and answer some of those questions and points that have been raised? I'm also correct in believing that this actually came out of Audit New South Wales. We're also pretty keen that we put some policies in place from memory. You're on mute.
Through you, Mr. Administrator, and that's correct. This a recommendation came from Audit New South Wales following a review they did on Council's Section 711 and 712 developer contributions plans. And just to inform Mr. Kitson, consultants weren't used to develop this policy. It was actually a policy that was being developed before the audit. And Audit New South Wales were very critical of the processes and governance framework that was in previously, and they were very supportive of developing a policy for works in kind agreements, so that there was a governance framework in place to mitigate risks in terms of disputes with valuations, legal disputes, and also to expectations of the developers, so that they infrastructure just wasn't delivered with an expectation at the end that council would pay over money, public money that is, for works that would have been done that was never agreed to. Also, contrary to Mr. Kitson's recommendation for a simpler process, the findings, and one of the reasons why we've gone to a formal WIC policy consistent with large councils like Blacktown and Liverpool, who have a works in kind policy, large development activity areas, was that there was actually more resources, more conflict, and more lack of transparency identified in some of the simpler process of the past. So it just adds that governance framework, and it is a fact that works in kind agreements are not compulsory; they are voluntary. And a consideration for a developer, if they can deliver it at a cheaper cost rather than paying a contributions plan rate, then it's an option for them moving forward. So just in terms of this was also reviewed by Council's legal team, who are supportive of the policy going forward. And as I mentioned before, it is a recommendation of Audit New South Wales to actually formally adopt the works in kind policy. When Audit New South Wales did their audit, there was a draft policy in place, and their recommendation was to formally adopt the works in kind policy. In terms of the policy itself, it was put out on public exhibition between March 2021 and April 2021. We received 5 submissions. A number of those submissions have been addressed in the report. And apart from minor administrative changes to the exhibited documents, we recommend the policy for adoption.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Look, I do believe it's important to have an in-kind policy situation, because I'm completely familiar with the fact that sometimes in exuberance, things get missed and glossed over when we're dealing with developers, particularly in councils that I've been involved with in the past. You know, there has been issues. It does make sense to allow developers to be able to do things if they can incorporate it in an early stage in a development or anything, then it's cheaper for them, cheaper for us at the end of the day, and it's a win-win situation. But I'm most persuaded by the fact that if the Auditor General, who of course we have had recent words with, I think it's important that we don't disagree with him on everything, and that maybe for these purposes, I think it's important that we follow their recommendation and actually get these policies in place. So with that, I will approve those recommendations as shown on the screen, and bring those as a decision of council. Item 2.8, beach nourishment opportunity. This sounds like a really good idea. I expect, but cost, I suspect, is going to be an issue. So, Mr. Cox, again, this is your area. Can you just very quickly just do the pros and cons of going through this and so on?
Sure, Mr. Administrator. And I'll just make the point too that the former administrator, Mr. Person, also identified that beach nourishment was a critical issue, not only for the Central Coast, but the entire east coast of Australia as a result of coastal erosion. He resolved to write to various ministers and the Premier about an offshore nourishment proposal that could service the East Coast. But in terms of this proposal, an opportunity has come through a Sydney Metro West Tunnel project for some crushed sandstone that potentially could be delivered to 3 local government areas, Sutherland, Northern Beaches and the Central Coast, and for the Central Coast primarily for Wamberal. And basically the process the report we're putting forward tonight is for an opt-in in principle approach. Obviously that is subject to further environmental approvals. It's also dependent on a decision from Transport for New South Wales. They're currently reviewing tenders at the moment and to see whether it's commercially feasible to do the beach nourishment project. But in terms of a report tonight, we're seeking endorsement to opt in principle, but however, it is subject to further funding from the state government and also to subject to further community consultation and also to further environmental approvals and investigations on the environmental issues that may be associated with the project.
Yes, so I agree with what Mr. Person discussed some time ago now with myself. I'm quite comfortable with us approaching and going through this part of it. I'll draw people's attention to the recommendation 5 that says we won't be proceeding without it coming back to council, clearly with any impact from an environmental matter being considered and also the costs being considered, because clearly we're not in a position to spend vast sums of money at this point in time. So with that in place, I'm happy to resolve the resolutions as shown on the screen. Which moves to item 2.9, the review of application of social media policy for councillors. That's something which we have to do. It comes up. Effectively, we have no councillors at the present point in time and unlikely to have councillors before September next year. So with that, I just propose to receive the report and review of application of social media policy for councillors and adopt the resolution as shown on the screen at this point in time. I did mention right at the beginning that we had one confidential item, which is item 3.1, which is the tender evaluation for the animal care facility management, in other words, the pound. Mr. Cox, I understand that we're declining to accept some of these tenders, but can you just outline briefly what we were looking for and the fact that we've got to go out to the market again?
Yeah, sure, Mr. Administrator. So the contract is for the management of our impounded animals at 2 animal care facilities. So we're looking at combining 2 contracts into one for efficiencies. Basically, the reason for declining the tenders at this stage is that we're looking for further efficiencies, and particularly in terms of our impounded livestock. And there's an opportunity has arisen to consolidate the impoundment of livestock with the current animal care facilities. Also, too, the tender evaluation panel felt that the council hadn't provided adequate information to enable the tenderers to sufficiently respond and demonstrate an understanding of council's requirements to manage both facilities. So there was looking at additional scope. We also brought in an independent panel reviewer from Lake Macquarie because also there's an opportunity with Lake Macquarie Council to receive some of their oversupply animals. And felt that the current tender didn't address some of those operations as well. And also to a recent inspection of our Erina facility has identified some significant costs to upgrade that facility. So there may be opportunities in operating out of one facility into the future. So we wanted some of the scope to also include some of the potential for that. So as to provide further efficiencies into the animal management care facilities going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Well, good luck with that. And with that, I will vote to adopt the resolutions that are displayed on the screen. And that basically completes the council meeting for tonight. I do want to thank participants because it is interesting and difficult times. So I thank you for taking the time and effort to be able to contribute to the meeting tonight. I know it's not always easy, and sometimes the internet runs a little bit slow, but by and large, we seem to have got through tonight without much in the way of technical difficulties. And then the final thing that I do want to say is somebody who's not showing on my screen at the moment, but Shane's last meeting tonight. So Shane Sullivan is leaving us, and for those listeners out there, she's been the main glue that sits behind the scene and making sure council meetings run smoothly. Also, she's been there at the council to make sure our overall governance policies and so on are kept up to date, etc., etc. And I really want to take this opportunity on council's behalf to thank Shane for her service and contribution to the council since 2014. She started at Gosford in 2014, and she played a massive role in getting the delivery of the SRV application in. If you think about it, we couldn't get the application in until early in the new year. We didn't have an opportunity to go through all the normal procedures. So it was a massive role and a massive learning curve to actually get a submission in to them, which did involve some help from IPART in terms of allowing us to be late in putting forward our new submission. She's also, during that time, brought a new council on, which was the new council following the merger, and she's also led the transition away from councillors into administration, firstly with Dick and then secondly with myself. So that combines with having a major role in the COVID management team in the council. I have to say a big thank you to Shane for your efforts over this past, and it's not the best way to be able to say farewell to someone who's provided a great service to the organisation, and I think there's a lot of people who've learned a lot from you. You will be missed. Your skills and expertise will be particularly missed, but I understand you have upgraded your position. You are now going to be a director at another council, and I congratulate you on being able to get that role. So I wish you all the best, Shane, and on the way we're going, I might not even see you again because COVID's going through to the 9th, and I think that was your last day. So if I don't get to see you again, all the best, and I'm sure the rest of the executive will be wishing you well too. So thank you, and with that, I will close the meeting for tonight.
Goodbye, everyone. Is that it?
Any reason why my Central Coast Council logo is back to front?